For 3 decades, this mother devoted her entire life to raising a child that wasn't biologically hers, Henry. She gave up her youth, her career, and even her own happiness, all so that he could have a better future. She worked tirelessly, never shying away from hardship, hoping for just one simple thing, that he would grow up, be happy, and feel grateful. But just when she thought she could finally enjoy peace by his side in her twilight years, she was struck by a devastating shock. When she told Henry she had retired, the very son she considered her everything didn't hesitate to call her a burden, a freeloader, and coldly kicked her out of the house. In that painful moment, she woke up. No longer the submissive woman she once was, she decided to stand up and reclaim her self-worth that had been trampled for so many years. Henry had no idea that behind his mother's silence was a secret that, once revealed, would make him pay for his betrayal. But what had turned Henry into someone so cruel? The day she came home, feeling relieved after retiring, she thought her son would understand and share her feelings. But upon hearing the news, Henry erupted in anger, as if she had done something wrong. He shouted, berating her for quitting a job that paid $8,000 a month, accusing her of laziness and of wanting to live off others. She remained silent, trying to stay calm. Deep down, she knew Henry was under pressure from his wife's family, people who, she knew well, never valued her. But the pain still couldn't be hidden. She had quit her job to be there for him, to help when his wife, Ella, was preparing for pregnancy. She wanted to be a support, a helping hand during this important phase of their family. But all she received in return was suspicion, insults, and disrespect. The home that once felt warm suddenly became suffocating. Henry, the son she had sacrificed her entire life for, now saw her as a burden. The words, "Why did you quit your job?" became a knife straight to the heart of the mother who had devoted her whole life to him. But it wasn't just Henry. His wife's family didn't want her around either. When she offered to help take care of the baby after Ella gave birth, she didn't receive thanks but a chilling sense of contempt. Ella, with a cold expression, bluntly said that postpartum care should be handled by professionals. To make matters worse, her mother, Arya, mocked her, saying that raising kids these days is a science, not something for someone who used to do manual labor. This belittlement wasn't accidental. It felt planned and coordinated. Ella and her mother worked seamlessly together, from glances to words, sending a clear message. She had no place in this family. Though she tried to keep the peace and endure to avoid conflict, she began to realize the bitter truth. Her love was not appreciated, but seen as a nuisance. Even more painful was that Henry, her son, didn't take her side, didn't defend her against such blatant insults. How much longer could she endure such cold treatment? Despite being denied the role of caregiver, she stayed patient, keeping the family harmony. She stepped back, making room for Arya, the one Henry's family trusted more. But instead of understanding, Arya boldly demanded she cover all the costs for hiring a nanny and postpartum nurse. Henry not only didn't oppose this, he agreed, saying that since she had retired, she should be responsible now that the household was expecting increased expenses. At that moment, it felt like a heavy blow. All her patience, all her hopes for a close-knit family, collapsed. She realized that for all those years, they had never truly seen her as family, only as a convenient source of money, a living ATM in the house. No one asked if she was tired, if she could manage. They only cared about what more she could pay for. For the first time in years, she spoke up clearly. "I want to rest. I've worked enough." But when she voiced her desire to retire, the reaction was worse than anything she could have imagined. When she announced she wanted to rest in her old age, Ella burst out laughing mockingly. She didn't hesitate to say harshly that since she had no pension and no savings, how could she even retire? Ella ridiculed her past struggles, the shabby house she bought, her low-paying job, and concluded that her whole life was proof of poor planning. Henry didn't defend his mother. On the contrary, He loudly told her not to stress Ella, who was trying to get pregnant. He even barked an order. "You're still healthy. You can work another 20 years." Hearing those words, she was stunned. All the years of labor, all the sleepless nights working overtime, all the sacrifices for the family, now reduced in her son's eyes to someone useless who must keep contributing. No gratitude, no recognition. The promises of, "I'll take care of you once I'm settled," turned out to be a clumsy lie. She looked at her son, the one she had once loved with all her heart, and no longer recognized him. But the pain wasn't over. His next words would push her into an even more painful awakening. While she was still trying to swallow her pain and stay calm, Henry spoke again, this time in a more vicious tone than ever. He unleashed all his resentment, blaming her for his impoverished life. "If you hadn't divorced, maybe I could have lived a wealthy life." Those words struck her heart like a knife. Henry not only ignored all her sacrifices, but blatantly claimed that she owed him for life, that his misfortunes were her fault. Her heart shattered into pieces. She had done everything to protect Henry from harm. The truth was, she didn't divorce out of selfishness or personal reasons. It was to protect Henry. She knew that had she stayed in that marriage, her son would not only have grown up in emotional coldness, but might have been abandoned or thrown into an orphanage. She chose to give up everything, her husband, her family, her reputation, even her own peace, just so he could live a decent life, no less than anyone else. And now, she wasn't just forgotten. She was being blamed by the very person she had loved through her youth. In that moment, she wasn't just a heartbroken mother. She became an awakened woman. And now, she was ready to reveal the greatest truth she had kept hidden all these years. At last, she no longer kept in her heart the truth that had long been part of her soul. Henry was not her biological son. He was an abandoned child, frail, skinny, and born with a congenital heart defect at just over a year old. The first time she saw him at the orphanage, she knew the child had no chance unless someone reached out. And she, a very young woman at the time, chose to do just that. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but from a simple feeling, compassion. From that moment on, she considered Henry her own flesh and blood, ignoring her relatives' objections, and even defying her husband, who fiercely opposed her decision. That very choice fractured her marriage. After the divorce, she became a single mother, raising Henry alone through countless labor jobs, from cleaning offices to staying up at night crafting handmade goods to pay for his treatment. On cold winter nights when Henry had a fever and lay unconscious, she cried and prayed, wishing she could trade her youth for his health. She never told Henry about his origins, not out of fear of rejection, but because she feared hurting the pride of a child who had already grown up with so many disadvantages. She wanted him to be able to hold his head high among friends, not carry the shame of being adopted or abandoned. Everything she did, hiding the truth, sacrificing, fighting, came from pure love. But now, after hearing Henry heartlessly berate her, she bitterly realized, in his eyes, she had never truly been his mother. How many more wounds could a mother like that bear from the child she had always protected? She alone raised Henry into adulthood. From a skinny, sickly boy, Henry gradually grew strong, went to college, something not every child in such a situation could achieve. Throughout that journey, she never spared effort or money. Her house was cramped. Meals were sometimes just cold rice with soy sauce, but Henry's tuition was always paid on time. Every time he achieved something, no matter how small, she quietly rewarded herself with a smile. Even though she lived alone, with no family by her side, she always told herself, as long as he's happy, I won't feel lonely. But now, all those memories existed only within her, while Henry seemed to remember none of it. Called a burden by her own son, kicked out of the house, treated like a bothersome shadow, her life felt like a cruel joke. Her trust, her love, all her devotion, returned only as cold-hearted ingratitude. Looking back at her life for the first time, She didn't feel strong anymore. But in that pit of despair, a thought sparked. At least she had kept the biggest secret, the $8 million inheritance left by her former employer. And perhaps now, she no longer needed to stay silent. She carried her suitcase and stepped out of the house she had helped pay for. The place that once felt like a home, at least in her imagination. When she declared she was severing ties and no longer considered Henry her son, the house instantly fell into chaos. Arya and Ella reacted harshly, accusing her of being irresponsible, a cruel mother for abandoning the family. But she stood firm. She responded with cold composure. "The law only requires me to raise a child until 18. I've done that for over 30 years. That statement was like a clean, sharp cut. Henry still tried to cling to the role of victim, continuing to blame her for all his life's failures. He said she owed him a lifetime, that she had ruined his future from the moment he was born. But this time, she remained silent no longer. She understood. A mother cannot live forever in the role of a victim. She had fulfilled her duty, and now she would live as an independent person, no longer bound by obligation or blind love. Only Henry wasn't ready to stop, and his next reactions would horrify her even more. As she firmly walked away, Henry screamed behind her, his face twisted in furious disbelief. He couldn't believe the mother he had controlled for so many years dared to arbitrarily end their relationship. Henry continued playing the victim, berating her for giving birth to him without asking his permission, blaming her for all the misfortunes in his life. His words were not only unreasonable but also cruel, as if she had never sacrificed a single day for him. Standing in the quiet hallway, she looked at her son and could no longer recognize the once familiar face. The person who had once been her entire world was now a stranger, selfish, venomous, and full of hatred. She said nothing more, only dropped a cryptic line. "Back then you were found in a cold trash bin." Henry froze. He didn't understand what she meant, but she didn't explain, nor did she need to. She turned and walked away, leaving behind accusations, screams, and insults. This time she didn't look back. But Henry wasn't someone who gave up easily, especially when he had no idea what was truly waiting for him. Ella and Arya weren't going to let her leave quietly. They hurled venomous threats, saying that as an old woman with nowhere to go, she would soon come crawling back and wouldn't be able to live peacefully. But this time, she was no longer the submissive woman she once was. She looked at them calmly, then slowly reminded them that the house they were living in, she had paid for it. That statement stunned them into silence. Ella erupted in outrage, screaming that the house was rightfully hers and her husband's, that the woman had no claim to it anymore, not a single right left. But she didn't flinch. With a composed gaze, she declared, "If necessary, I'm willing to pay double to get it back. And when that happens, you might not even have a place to stay." Her voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a heavy stone. In her eyes at that moment there was no anger, only a cold, unwavering resolve. At last, she had learned how to protect herself from those who once crushed her trust. Ella threw her a scornful look, mocking her for not even having $1,000 in her pocket, calling her a delusional maid who thought she was a lady. But she didn't respond. Not a single retort, not even a glance for debate. She quietly walked out of the house, pulled out her phone, and opened a list of the city's most expensive mansions. As sunlight hit the screen, the bank balance of over $8 million shone clearly, like a statement that she needed no one's support, no one's approval. For years, she had chosen silence to protect others. Now she chose silence to protect herself. A new life had begun, and she would live it the way she deserved. Not as a servant, not as a shadow behind her children, but as an independent woman with worth, with assets, and with the right to choose happiness. That journey would begin in the most unexpected place, the very place where someone once tried to humiliate her for her simple appearance. After leaving the house full of wounds, she chose to stay temporarily at a 5-star hotel, not to show off, but simply to regain some peace. During those days, she began reviewing a list of high-end villas to purchase. One morning, she visited a luxurious real estate showroom specializing in the city's most expensive villas. Coincidentally, the receptionist who welcomed her was Lily, Aria's niece. Lily seemed surprised but remained polite. However, before the conversation began, a senior employee named Hannah appeared. Hannah looked her up and down, then made a humiliating comment, suggesting she had only come to get free pastries. Without hiding her contempt, Hannah even intended to call security to remove her from the showroom. Unfazed by the curious eyes of the crowd, she simply said, "I'd like to speak to the manager." Hannah smirked, thinking she was about to teach her an embarrassing lesson. But little did they know, the lesson that day was meant for them. The manager, Logan, quickly arrived and asked her to provide financial documents to verify her ability to purchase a villa. She said little, simply handing over an envelope with official bank certification, documents that had been pre-verified. But Hannah wouldn't let it go. She snatched the confirmation letter, read it aloud in front of everyone, and mocked that it looked fake. The showroom fell into a stunned silence. Scattered customers shook their heads, whispering. Lily stood nearby, her face burning with shame. The woman remained calm, quietly took out her phone, and opened her banking app, where a balance of over $8 million was displayed. The screen lit up, and astonishment spread across the room. Hannah froze, her face pale. Still, she tried to excuse herself, stammering that anyone can fake an online balance. At this point, Logan had to intervene, offering a sincere apology for the insult and unprofessional behavior of his employee. He proposed assigning someone else to handle the transaction, but the woman simply smiled and looked at Lily. "This young lady will handle the contract for me." An unexpected twist had arrived. The person once looked down upon would now lead the biggest deal of the day. When Logan accepted her request for Lily to oversee the contract, Hannah instantly lost control. She screamed furiously, throwing out vile insults to humiliate the woman. In her rage, Hannah even shouted that the woman had once been a maid for rich men, implying that she had gotten wealthy through shady relationships. But this time, the woman no longer chose silence. She looked Hannah straight in the eyes and delivered a stunning blow. "Henry, my adopted son, once told me you had shady dealings with clients just to meet your monthly sales targets." The words struck like lightning. The entire showroom went dead silent. Hannah stood frozen, her eyes darting frantically for a way out. Logan immediately called security and declared, "Hannah is hereby terminated on the spot." But the woman didn't stop there. In a calm yet firm voice, she asked that Hannah be temporarily held to file a lawsuit for defamation and public slander. The ones who once looked down on her now had to bow their heads and face the consequences. And this time, she wasn't doing it out of anger, but because she understood. This is how a strong woman defends her dignity. Unlike past times when insults went unanswered, this time she immediately called the police right there in the showroom. When the authorities arrived, she clearly stated the facts. She had been insulted, slandered, and had her dignity publicly defamed in front of many witnesses. Hannah, once aggressive and bold, was now trembling, her face pale with fear. The police suggested a civil resolution, but also reminded everyone that without a public apology, Hannah could face criminal charges for defamation. Under that pressure, Hannah had no choice but to bow her head and apologize to the woman in front of all employees and customers present. As Hannah's shame-filled apology echoed, the woman said nothing. She simply stood tall, a quiet assertion that the once disrespected woman had now reclaimed her rightful respect. Lily, the young employee who was once looked down on, was not only allowed to handle the transaction, but was honored with closing the biggest deal of the day. The woman didn't just buy one villa, she signed contracts for 2 at once, paying in full on the spot. A single signature affirmed her new status, no longer a submissive mother, but a successful woman, one who had just won a battle of honor and helped another young person rise above prejudice. And from that moment on, she began to rewrite her life with the kindness no one had ever given her before. Lily couldn't hide her emotions. After 3 months in real estate without closing a single deal, today she had finalized a multi-million-dollar transaction. Choking back tears, she thanked the woman, not just for the big deal, but for believing in her, someone even her own colleagues had underestimated. The woman gave a small nod, then gently said, "I was once treated like you, so I understand." She then asked Lily to arrange a cleaning crew to get the house ready for her move in the next few days. As she stepped out of the showroom, the sunlight gently touched her face. Inside her, there was no more resentment, no more suppression or heavy burdens like before. For the first time in many years, she felt truly respected. Not because of anyone, not out of obligation, not from enduring, but because she deserved it. But just when it seemed like her life was entering a new, peaceful chapter, those she thought she had left behind suddenly came back. Just a few days later, Henry unexpectedly reached out, not to apologize, but to blame her. He angrily claimed that because of her, Hannah lost her job, causing his family to face pressure from relatives. But behind his accusations lay another motive. Henry began probing about her new employer, insinuating that she was being kept by some rich man. She didn't bother getting angry. She simply replied, "It's none of your business. I already told you. We're done." Then she firmly blocked all phone numbers from Henry, Ella, and Arya. No more contact, no more entanglement. This time, she truly severed all ties with the family that had so mercilessly trampled her trust. But Henry wasn't ready to give up. Someone who had grown used to manipulating others' emotions wouldn't easily surrender control like that. Cut off from all communication, Henry turned to an old tactic, playing on sympathy. Every day he stood at the gates of the luxury villa neighborhood where she had moved in, pretending to be heartbroken, crying loudly. One day, even dropping to his knees, sobbing like a child in a tragedy. He hoped these performances would touch the heart of the mother who had once sacrificed everything for him. But this time, she was no longer the soft-hearted woman she used to be. She instructed the security guards not to let Henry near, and she hired a private driver to avoid being stopped. For 2 whole weeks, Henry kept up his act, but no one came out. When he received no response, he changed tactics. This time, Henry went to Samuel, her ex-husband, the man who had been his nominal father for many years. He caused a scene, demanding a DNA test, even pressuring the man to acknowledge a paternal role. But Henry didn't know that this act would become the key that opened the final chapter of all the lies. And the truth was about to be exposed. This time, no one would be able to run from it. Samuel called her in a calm but concerned voice. He said that Henry had come to him, made a scene, and forced a DNA test. The result, of course, was clear. He was not Henry's biological father. Samuel still honored his old promise and did not reveal the secret she had long kept, that Henry was an abandoned child she adopted when he was just over a year old. Although they had divorced long ago, Samuel still respected her and held no resentment. But she knew this wasn't the end. Henry wouldn't give up so easily. He had used his final card, clinging to a father, and failed. What would he try next? She didn't have to wait long. Henry began turning to a more dangerous tactic, using social media to garner sympathy. And this time, he wasn't just targeting her as a mother, but portraying her as a villain in a fabricated narrative of his own. The confrontation was shifting into a public arena and becoming more ruthless than ever. At a high-end piano showroom, she was trying out an instrument when suddenly, Arya and a group of her friends walked in, throwing out a barrage of mocking remarks. They ridiculed her past as a maid, scoffing at her for pretending to be a noblewoman in such a luxurious place. But she didn't react. The showroom staff maintained professionalism and courteously invited her to continue playing. The group of women stayed, their attitudes smug, waiting to witness her embarrassment, hoping she would fumble in front of the elegant piano, not knowing how to play a single note. But they were wrong. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes of Moonlight Sonata rang out, gentle, profound, and full of emotion. The space fell into silence. The staff and other customers paused everything, turning to look at the silver-haired woman playing with the soul of someone who had weathered a lifetime of storms. When the piece ended, the room erupted in applause. She didn't look toward Arya or the others who had waited to see her fail, because she knew their silence now was her greatest victory. But this wasn't the end, because what would silence them completely was still to come. Though the piece had ended, not everyone stayed silent. One woman in Arya's group sneered, saying her playing sounded like a beginner's. But before she could gloat, a young man nearby spoke up. He said her technique was not only solid, but her playing conveyed emotional depth that not everyone could deliver. "She doesn't just play with her hands, she plays with her heart," the young man said. His words shifted the mood in the room completely. Only then did she calmly share that the piano wasn't new to her. Years ago, her former employer, the man who left her his entire estate, was an artist. He had taught her many things: art, culture, and above all, how to live with dignity and self-respect. "Thanks to him, I didn't just live differently. I lived true to my value," she said, her voice quiet but confident. The mocking voices from Arya's group gradually faded, but she remained composed. Then she asked the staff to prepare the purchase contract for the $155,000 piano. No haggling, no hesitation. When the staff asked whose name to put on the contract, she smiled and clearly wrote, "Eleanor Brooks." That name stunned many in the showroom. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to retaliate with words. One action was enough to make every person who once looked down on her bow their heads. Shock filled the entire showroom. Arya and her group were horrified to learn that the woman they once ridiculed was now the owner of 2 luxury villas and had just purchased an expensive piano. In a daze, someone in the group blurted out, "She must have gotten rich through shady means." Arya immediately chimed in, accusing her of being a con artist who had fabricated a tragic backstory to swindle the wealthy. The room grew tense once again, but instead of getting angry, she simply looked at them with a calm expression. Another woman, who had previously been scammed out of more than $100,000 in an investment, panicked and suspected that she might be the same person who had tricked her. That woman quickly called the police to the showroom, demanding a background check. As the crowd grew restless, she remained composed, not taking a single step back. Within minutes, the police arrived. After verifying everything, they confirmed her identity was completely legitimate, and all her assets were properly documented. There were no signs of fraud or any illegal activity. The baseless accusations were immediately dismissed. Silence returned to the room. This time, it was the silence of humiliation. Arya and her group lowered their heads, unable to say another word. She didn't need to scream for justice. The truth was loud enough on its own. She walked up to face Arya, the one who had once belittled, rejected, and slandered her without mercy. No anger, no raised voice. She simply looked Arya in the eyes and said, "I didn't abandon anyone. You were the ones who kicked me out, forcing me to become a maid for the elderly. I only did what I had no choice but to do." Arya immediately denied it, claiming she was making things up, that they had never treated her poorly. But the woman only smiled and pulled out a small USB. "I recorded everything. If needed, I'll release it for everyone to hear and judge for themselves." That sentence stirred murmurs among the crowd watching. Many who had once sided with Arya now turned skeptical and angry. Realizing things were turning against her, Arya was speechless. The woman left the showroom with her head held high, not once looking back. She knew that the past, which once caused her so much pain and hurt, no longer had the power to control her life. And from that moment on, those who once claimed to be family no longer deserved a place in her world. On social media, Henry began live streaming, telling a dramatic tale of being abandoned by his mother, trying to win viewers' sympathy with tearful, theatrical words. He claimed to be a pitiful son, kicked out by his biological mother after becoming successful, and that he had done everything to support his elderly mother, only to be betrayed. These lies quickly drew in thousands of viewers, until a mysterious account suddenly appeared and donated money to him live on air. That account belonged to her. The unexpected act made all eyes turn to the accompanying message. If you want to hear the other side of the story, visit my channel. Immediately, a wave of viewers flooded her page to hear the truth. She didn't cry, nor did she resort to theatrics. She simply recounted every part of the story in a calm voice, accompanied by documents, recordings, and even an adoption certificate from the orphanage, confirming Henry was not her biological son. The evidence was clear and undeniable. She didn't just expose Henry's lies. She showed the world the image of a mother who had been drained and exploited to the core, now bravely reclaiming her voice. The internet exploded. People no longer pitied Henry. They began to rage. The same viewers who once defended him now turned to insults and condemnation. The truth had come to light, and from now on, no one could deceive the public with cheap performances again. After being exposed, Henry showed no remorse. Instead, he further enraged the public with a horrifying statement. If she hadn't rescued me back then, maybe a wealthy family would have adopted me, and my life would have been better. That comment was the final spark that burned away the last trace of sympathy from viewers. Henry wasn't just ungrateful. He completely erased the life-saving act, the care, and a lifetime of sacrifice from the woman who had picked him up from a trash bin. The online community turned their backs en masse. Henry, once a figure of pity, had now become the symbol of ingratitude, selfishness, and hypocrisy. In response to the overwhelming public outrage, she decided to file a lawsuit against Henry for defamation, harassment, and personal reputation damage. The case was processed quickly. The court ruled in her favor. Henry was ordered to pay damages for emotional distress and was permanently banned from speaking publicly about her or live streaming on any social media platform. This final response didn't come from anger. It came from the law, something Henry could neither deny nor manipulate. After the legal victory, she was finally able to live under true protection. Henry lost all access to social media platforms. His tools for fabricating stories and manipulating public opinion were completely cut off. Every income stream from his personal channels was terminated. No longer did she have to wake up each morning dreading public humiliation or threats online. That feeling of freedom and peace was something she had long yearned for over the years. She didn't stop there. She initiated legal procedures to reclaim the house that had once been under her name, but had been occupied by Henry and Ella. The process went smoothly, and in the end, the house rightfully returned to her. Standing in the familiar but now empty room, she understood that she had regained more than just property. She had reclaimed herself. After decades of being bound by obligation, responsibility, and one-sided love, she was now a free woman in every sense of the word. Once all legal formalities were completed and the house returned to her, Ella, who had silently stood by Henry through all the chaos, offered no resistance. She didn't argue, didn't plead, and quietly signed the divorce papers. Perhaps, after everything, Ella had finally seen Henry's true face, a selfish man, constantly blaming others, utterly incapable. Henry vanished from her life without a word of goodbye. No one knew where he went, and no one cared. And as for her, after so many years of living for others, she finally no longer needed to ask how he was doing or what he was up to. For her, all burdens had been laid down. The darkest chapter of her life had come to an end, quietly, definitively, with no regrets. Years later, an old friend of hers, while on a business trip in Canada, mentioned having seen Henry wandering like a homeless man on cold city streets. She was skeptical at first, but after searching on social media, she found video clips of Henry. sometimes hugging a trash can, sometimes laughing hysterically, other times collapsing on the sidewalk crying like a child. He was no longer the man who once confidently manipulated others, just a vague, drifting shadow, lost among a lifetime of poor choices. She looked at those images, feeling neither satisfaction nor sorrow. Inside her was only a quiet void. Henry was now the result of his own actions. There was no one left to blame, no one left to cling to. Her love had once been his final lifeline, and he had thrown it away with his own hands. No one can save a person if that person doesn't want to be saved. After selling the 2 villas, she decided to move to a quiet lakeside town. There she lived in a small, lovely house, spending her mornings tending flowers, afternoons painting, evenings listening to music and writing in her journal. No one called her mom to demand things. No one saw her as a burden or a walking wallet. No one dismissed all she had been through. To her, life now wasn't about being repaid. It was about healing. Someone once asked, "Do you regret adopting Henry?" She simply smiled, her eyes gentle, and replied, "No, I only regret not learning how to protect myself sooner." It wasn't a bitter statement. It was a message for anyone who's ever lived so much for others that they forgot themselves. She wasn't perfect. She had once made mistakes, once over-sacrificed, once lost herself. But in the end, she learned the most important lesson. Living for yourself is not selfish. It's the first step to truly knowing how to love. Her life didn't start over. It continued in a completely new way, free and whole. Her life was a journey of a woman who once lived silently for others and who eventually found the courage to live for herself. What she went through was not just pain, but a lesson in love, dignity, and the boundaries every relationship must have. No one deserves to be looked down on just because they love too much. No one deserves to be used just because they always sacrifice. Hopefully, this story serves as a gentle reminder that love is sacred. But first, learn to love and protect yourself. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss future videos.